This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nickthose, and it's Wednesday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we'll be looking at the Devotion mechanic. This mechanic made its debut in the original Theros block. That block was inspired by Greek mythology, and there were various gods in the set that asked for your devotion, as well as several other cards that paid you off for having high devotion. Basically, devotion is a mechanic that pays you off for having lots of mana symbols of a single color on your permanents in play. So far, we've seen the devotion mechanic in original Theros block and more recently in Theros Beyond Death. Overall, it has proven to be a pretty powerful mechanic. Of the 60 cards that feature it, about half of them have at least 1 point using my scoring system. In this video, we're going to look at the 10 of those that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. At number 10, I have Perforos, God of the Forge. Like all Theros gods, Perforos isn't a creature unless you reach enough devotion. Even when he isn't a creature, though, he has some pretty powerful effects. In addition to having a mass fire-breathing effect, Perforos has an ability that burns your opponent every time you have a creature into the battlefield. Basically, he wants you to go really wide to get the most out of both abilities. He was played in various aggressive devotion decks in Standard, but he hasn't been played anywhere since rotating. At number 9, it is Annex, Hardened in the Forge. He's part of a cycle of demigods in Theros Beyond Death, all of which do something with devotion. In his case, his power is equal to your devotion to red. He also has a very powerful additional ability which gives you a 1/1 token every time one of your creatures dies, and if that creature has 4 or more power, you get 2 tokens. This includes himself, so if your devotion is high enough, he'll put a couple 1/1s in play when he dies. Now, those tokens can't block, but Annex would be pretty absurd if they did. Annex gives aggro decks a lot of insurance against board sweepers and things like that, which is one of their major weaknesses. Unsurprisingly, it has gained all its points in standard red aggro decks. It's still in standard now, and likely to gain some more points before it rotates. At number 8, it is Clothus, God of Destiny, a god from Theros Beyond Death. If your devotion to red and green is high enough, it gets to be a creature, but like all the good gods, it does something really good until it can become a large, indestructible creature. In this case, Clothus turns cards in graveyards into value. Every one of your pre-combat main phases, you get to exile a card from a graveyard, and if it's a land, you get mana, and if it's a non-land, you drain your opponent for 2. Ramping will actually indirectly help you raise your devotion, because you'll be able to play more stuff, and the life drain effect can be a win condition all on its own. This can be especially nice against opponents who are graveyard decks, because you get to hate on their graveyard, while also getting all kinds of value out of doing it. All of that has led to Clothus already finding multi-format success both as a main deck card and sideboard card, and that is likely to continue. At number 7, it is Keranos, God of Storms, another Theros god that needs devotion to its colors to become a creature. Keranos may not have as impressive of stats as some of the other Theros gods we're looking at. 5 mana for a 6/5 isn't as exciting as most of them, but that ability is just silly. Every turn it's going to give you a full card worth of value, either by drawing you a land or lightning bolting something. That's some pretty impressive power. It saw some play in Jeskai Tempo decks in Standard, and in Modern it used to be a frequent sideboard card for Splinter Twin decks. Sometimes Twin decks had to side into being more traditional control decks, and siding in a win condition that wasn't the twin combo was a good idea. And when they did, Keranos did a pretty good job for them. More recently, Keranos has been played in spell-heavy decks like Blue Moon and Is It Phoenix in Modern. At number 6, it is Grey Merchant of Asphodel, a creature who drains the opposing player an amount equal to your devotion to black. Even on an empty board, that means he drains 2 life, but most of the time when you play him, he has a far bigger impact on the board than that. Devotion to black decks were a big force in Standard, and Grey Merchant was a huge part of that. Some versions of the Devotion deck also ran Sidisi's Whip, which was particularly nasty with the Grey Merchant because it could allow you to get that into the battlefield ability twice, and most opponents have no hope of ever coming back from that. While the Grey Merchant was a force in Standard, it hasn't gained any points since rotating, despite the fact that it was recently reprinted and legal in Standard. At number 5, it is Master of Waves, which makes a number of elemental creature tokens equal to your devotion to blue, and it's also an elemental lord. Even on its own, it makes 1 token, and it will usually be making a lot more than that. The Master does have the downside that if it dies, all of its elemental friends will die too, but the efficiency here is great and worth the risk. And hey, protection from red does mean it can't be killed by a lot of cheap burn spells at least. Master of Waves helped make Devotion to Blue decks one of the best decks in Standard, and it's gained several points in modern Merfolk decks as well. At number 4, it is Thassa, God of the Sea, another Theros god who needs devotion to be a creature. Even when she isn't a creature, she's pretty nice. Thassa improves your draws by helping you scry, and can make your creatures unblockable, which is a nice way to push through damage. Especially because she can make herself unblockable if your loyalty to blue gets high enough. Thassa was a key card in standard Devotion to Blue decks, which were well positioned to make Thassa into a creature early on in the game. Devotion to Blue was one of the best decks in all of Theros Standard, so she found considerable success just in that one deck. She also has a single Premier Event top 8 from a Legacy Merfolk deck. At number 3, it is Thassa's Oracle. The Oracle gives you some powerful card selection, provided you can get your Devotion to Blue high enough, letting you choose a card to put on top of your library from the top X cards of your library. That's a pretty nice effect already, especially on a semi-reasonable 2-mana 1/3, but the Oracle's real power comes from the fact that it is an alternate win condition. If your devotion is higher than the number of cards in your library, you win the game on the spot. That might sound like it is sort of hard to achieve, and in most normal situations, it is, but the Oracle can be paired with other cards to be a very consistent win condition. In Pioneer, it was played alongside Inverter of Truth, and this combo deck was so successful that the Inverter had to be banned out of Pioneer. It is also played in Vintage Doomsday decks, which work in a similar fashion. Get rid of your whole deck and then win with the Oracle. While it is unlikely to continue to see play in Pioneer since Inverter was banned, it does look well positioned for more points in Vintage, and is even seeing play in some other formats like Modern and Legacy, although it doesn't have any points in those formats just yet. At number 2, we have Erebos, God of the Dead, a god that lets you pay life to draw cards. In addition to that, he keeps your opponent from gaining life, and of course, if your devotion is high enough, he becomes a huge indestructible creature. While there were lots of devotion decks in Theros Standard, Black was arguably the most powerful of the bunch, thanks to cards like Erebos and Grey Merchant of Asphodel, who we saw earlier on this list, which hugely incentivized you to play cards with lots of black mana symbols. Grey Merchant also combines well with Erebos because you knew you could pay a ton of life and count on gaining some of it back later with the Merchant. Erebos was also played in some less devotion-centric control decks while it was in Standard. So far, it hasn't gained any points outside of Block or Standard, and Thassa's Oracle will probably pass it in the near future. And at number 1, probably not surprising anyone, it is Nickthose, Shrine to Nyx. As we've seen throughout this video, Devotion was one of the format-defining mechanics for Theros Standard, with many Devotion decks achieving Tier 1 status, and Nickthose played a large role in that. This legendary land gave you a great payoff for playing lots of permanents with the same colored mana symbols on them, because it could help you produce absolutely absurd amounts of mana, even in the early going. While it saw play in a variety of Devotion decks, its most frequent home was, of course, Devotion to Blue and Devotion to Black, which, as we've seen, were 2 really good Devotion decks. In Devotion to Blue, it could help you easily cast things like Cyclonic Rift with Overload, and in Devotion to Green, it could help you cast a huge Genesis Hydra. Nickthose also has a few points in Modern where it has appeared in a few Elf decks who generally plan on using Nickthose to pump huge amounts of mana into Izuri Renegade Leader and win the game on the spot. It's also found success in mono-green ramp decks in Pioneer. Well, those are the 10 Devotion cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're interested in owning any of these cards, you can buy them at Card Kingdom. In the description, you'll find a direct link to each of these cards in their store. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you aren't already a subscriber, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you can stay aware of future videos. If you need to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, you will see the playlist on your screen shortly. Also, if you like listening to me talk about Magic, consider subscribing to my other YouTube channel, Nickthose History, where I put my PhD in history to use. Thanks for watching.